Earlier today, Iraqi security forces launched their counterattack to liberate Mosul from ISIL, also known as Daesh. This operation to regain control of Iraq's second largest city will likely continue for weeks, possibly longer. Iraq is supported by a wide range of coalition capabilities, including air support, artillery, intelligence, advisors, and forward air controllers. But to be clear, the thousands of combat forces who will liberate Mosul are all Iraqis. This liberation battle comes after more than 2 years of Daesh oppression in Mosul, during which they committed horrible atrocities, brutalized the people, and asserted the city was one of their twin capitals. ISIL's cruelty and reach has shown that they are not just a threat in Iraq and Syria, but to the region and the entire world. Over the course of these past 2 years, a coalition of more than 60 nations has united to defeat ISIL. We have conducted tens of thousands of precision strikes to support Iraqi operations. We've trained and equipped more than 54,000 Iraqi forces. And we supported our Iraqi partners as they fought to liberate their country. As we provide our support, we will continue to use precision to accurately attack the enemy and to minimize any impact on innocent civilians. We can't predict how long it will take for the Iraqi security forces to defeat Daesh in Mosul, but we know they will succeed, just as they did in Beiji, in Ramadi, in Fallujah, and more recently in Ghiyara and Sharqat. This may prove to be a long and tough battle, but the Iraqis have prepared for it, and we will stand by them. The Iraqi security forces and the coalition are not only fighting for the future of Iraq, we are fighting to ensure the security of all of our nations. We salute the bravery and commitment of the Iraqi security forces to this mission and wish them good luck and God's blessings in this battle.
Iraqi security forces, with the support of the counter-ISIL coalition, began operations to liberate Mosul. They started moving at 6 a.m. Baghdad time. This is a decisive moment in the counter-ISIL campaign. This fight is taking place with Iraqis firmly in the lead, including thousands of Iraqi army personnel, counterterrorism forces, and federal police. Kurdish Peshmerga and Sunni tribal forces are also playing a critical role in this fight. The coalition has conducted more than 54,000 training cycles for Iraqi security forces. It has conducted more than 10,000 precision strikes in Iraq. Including more than 70 in the Mosul area just this month. And Iraqi
At what level the JTACs are operating, and then more broadly, can you tell us some as up-to-date figures as you have on how many U.S. troops are in Iraq today? How many, is it still about 500 or so in Ghiyara? How close are they to the fight?
To put it in context again, we have, as we've talked about 5,000 U.S. forces in Iraq at this time, all part of this effort, part of the coalition to defeat ISIL. Many of those people are in enabler roles. They may be trainers. We've talked about the 12 Iraqi brigades that have been trained for this fight. Again, many of the U.S. forces have been part of that effort. We have a number of people providing logistical support to this effort. We've talked a lot about the effort to put Q West into a position to be sort of a forward staging area for this fight. That's a good example of some of the logistical support that's being provided. At each of these locations, of course, there might also be needs for force protection. Those are some of the U.S. forces. And we have some people in the train, advise, and assist mission as well.
Do you know if they are using Apaches in this so far?
Conduct their operations. You asked specifically as well about the Apaches. My understanding on the Apaches is they have not been used so far in this effort, but the Apaches are a capability, a very potent capability that we are prepared to use should it be
follow up on the JTAC question as well? Just to clarify, so is this activity that you described, or what the U.S. troops may be doing, is that happening in a way that has not occurred up till now in the campaign? And if so, is this a new authority that's been granted to General Townsend to authorize?
I prefer that General Townsend describe to you in more detail his plans with regard to this, but there's nothing different than what they've been doing previously. And I'm just talking about a capability that he has the ability to use, but whether or not it's required, that's something we'll have to wait and see.
But the capability is the same capability that has been employed previously, or it's something new? That's my question.
My understanding is that it's the same authority he's had for some time.
Are there any Americans in Mosul or on the outskirts of the city?
I think it's fair to say that there are Americans that are on the outskirts of the city, but I'm not going to get into the disposition of every single American.
U.S. military commanders had always said they didn't really see a need for this type of forward air control capability. So my first question is, can you tell us what changed that led them to now believe they need this capability?
I'd actually, Barbara would prefer that that question be put to General Townsend. This is something that he identified in his statement today. This is not a capability we, to my knowledge, have used very much, and I believe he's looking, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, forward-looking as to what might be required in the course of this campaign. This is a big city. This is a large area. This is an area where this will be a significant fight, and I think that what General Townsend has talked about, the unique capabilities that America can bring to bear, that the coalition can bring to bear in support of the Iraqis. He's got a suite of capabilities that he could employ, and this is one of them. But I don't want to get out ahead of him in terms of the actual use of this capability.
Sure. And can you tell us, does he have the authority to permit U.S. troops to actually enter Mosul as Iraqi units and PESH units move further forward, enter the city, and move into the city? Is it still an open question whether U.S. troops will go with them? Will U.S. troops enter Mosul, or is that completely off the table?
Barbara, I think we're on day one of what we expect will be a lengthy fight here. I'm not going to look ahead to the future. At this point, we are focused on the here and now and how this is playing out.
Well, you're
and
not ruling it out.
I'm not ruling it in. I'm not ruling it out. We are on day one, Barbara. We are barely got this thing started. Let's see how this plays out. We'll be working closely with the Iraqis. Nothing will happen with regard to U.S. forces that is not agreed to with the Iraqis. That's the most important thing here.
Yeah,
any action by U.S. forces, by the coalition, would have to be approved by Prime Minister Abadi.
But the question I have, Peter, is it is a given that it is a given that Iraqi forces will enter Mosul.
Yes.
This is not happening without them entering the city. So the question I have is not about what they want, but it is about what the U.S. wants, what the what Ash Carter wants.
We want the defeat of
Is he
ISIL.
able to accept the notion of U.S. troops entering Mosul? He must know what he thinks at this point.
Barbara, what the Secretary knows is that he wants ISIL defeated in Mosul, and we're going to do everything we can to support the Iraqis to achieve that goal. And you are getting way ahead of things here when you're talking about that situation. As you know, we haven't had a need for U.S. forces in Ramadi. We haven't had a need for them to enter other locations. And so we'll see how this plays out. We'll work carefully, coordinate with the Iraqis, work closely with our coalition partners as well.
I believe that there are up to 5,000 ISIS fighters inside Mosul, or this number has changed in the last few days.
The estimate I've seen, Joe, that I checked was between 3,000 to 5,000. We've seen other numbers that are higher, but we know that there's a substantial ISIL presence. We know that they've had 2 years to dig in, to build defensive systems, to plant IEDs, to do what they can to make life more difficult for the Iraqi security forces, certainly to make life much more difficult for the people of Mosul.
ISIL has known that this operation would take place in October for weeks. How difficult do you think it's making operations on the ground, the fact that they've known this would come and they've had time to prepare?
Well, certainly they have had 2 years to prepare for this. we've had time to prepare as well for what's to come. The Iraqis have had time.
To start, we've, as you know, we have 3 real lines of operations here. We provide the training for these 12 counterattack brigades that are involved in the fight. That's a coalition effort of the 19 coalition countries that are part of CJTF-OIR. We also provide lethal fires by both air and ground, and then we advise and assist. Those are the 3 things that CJTF-OIR does to enable the Iraqis. Continue to liberate villages. I think at the last count yesterday was 13, and they continue to move towards Mosul. The enemy is primarily, response has been indirect fire. We saw the first day of the operation a lot of VBIDs, vehicle-borne IED. Attention to, we've seen movement out of Mosul. We've got indications that leaders have left. A lot of the foreign fighters we expect will stay because they're not going to be able to exfiltrate as easily as some of the local fighters or the local leadership. So we expect there will be a fight. But you know, all I can tell you is there are fewer Daesh fighters today than there were yesterday, and there will be fewer tomorrow than there are today.
But when you mentioned the Apache, the use of Apache helicopters, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that point first. I think you said they're being used in nighttime operations.
Strike targets, and that's what they're doing. We get indications of where we expect enemy activity to be, and that's what we call their named area of interest, their NAI, and that's what we focus them on. And what we've seen is the Iraqis, it's also a confidence building measure as they hear those Apaches in the general area, and so that's really how we're using that. I mean, one of the things that I'm worried about as well is, you know, the enemy tries a spectacular attack, tries to figure out how to retain some ground in the Euphrates River Valley and causes the attention of the government of Iraq to come back south, and that delays or stalls the momentum going forward. And so, you know, we have our advise and assist teams with those units that are back in the Euphrates River Valley in those key hold areas to make sure that the enemy can't come back and do
about you didn't want to see ISIS sort of coming up behind you and the Iraqi forces as you move forward. You didn't want to go so fast that they would come up behind you and retake areas. Noticing that in recent weeks you've still had the occasional airstrike back down through the Euphrates River Valley, let me ask you, what are you seeing back down the line in terms of ISIS? Are these targets organized ISIS units, or are you seeing the beginning already of sort of the post-conflict insurgency that you were talking about? And can you give us your assessment more about that ISIS insurgency that you believe will develop?
Yeah, hey Barbara, it's great talking to you again. I would just say that, you know, what we've seen in the Euphrates River Valley, a really 3-man team, 3 to 5 maybe, and it's, you know, a mortar team maybe shooting indirect fire, just really harassing fires. We'll see some two men, one with a machine gun and another with a rifle, you know, harassing fires on a Iraqi unit. So it's not this organized, you know, insurgency that people think. But, you know, it's if you look at where the leadership for ISIL came, they came out of al-Qaeda in Iraq. And so, you know, we expect that as they are losing this terrain and they're losing their ability to dominate anything, that's where they're going to return to. And Baghdadi has said the same thing. And so, you know, we haven't seen the big, you know, networked insurgency, but we see these indicators. And so that's why what we don't want to do, as you know, is wait until the Iraqis are having to deal with it to prepare them for it. And so, you know, that's why we've in our training centers, why we're starting to give them more counterinsurgency so that they can be ready for it when the enemy transitions to that.
General, do you expect that the Apaches will be used as Iraqi forces push into Mosul?
Well, we'll use our, you know, we're going to use every capability to enable the Iraqis fight into Mosul. Where the Apaches will go, you know, we're going to make sure that we mitigate the risk. like we are right now. I mean, they're supporting the Iraqis. As far as them flying into Mosul, you know, I'm not going to tell how we're going to employ the Apaches.
I've heard for a long time that the U.S. should have done this sooner. The coalition should have got to Mosul sooner, should be fighting Aleppo sooner. There should be more Americans, a greater military intervention. Tell us why, or tell them why this is the right way, that it took this long, that by, with, and through should be believed and will sustain itself for regional security and for American interest.
Well, I will tell you, that sounds like, I'll just be honest, that sounds like a loaded question to me. What I would say is your United States military is very adaptable and flexible, and you know, it adapts to the mission it's given, and it leverages every resource it can to be successful. You know, I've heard a lot about you know, how you go advise and assist. We've been advising and assisting. This isn't new. I mean, we've done this in Afghanistan. You know, when I was in Afghanistan, we had advise and assist. You had MIT teams doing that. So, you know, this isn't a new way of war in my mind, because we've got repetitions to do that. I would just say, you know, the Iraqi army, the reason it took a while is, you know, they got caught with an enemy that was, frankly, at that time more capable than they were. The other piece was, they weren't prepared for it. The training they got was counter.